Wherever you are, there's a dockyard sitting, waiting for you. No matter where, no matter how, you can get there. Do not worry, the Royal Navy has you safe. Hello everyone, how are we doing? Right then, so as you might have noticed from the announcement, tonight's live is kind of going to be epic in that I have 65 slides. Not only do I have 65 slides, I currently am in the process of finishing off backing up today's videos and recordings and other things onto my portable hard drive, which has still got 30 minutes to go. So instead of having a mouse, I am doing this all via mousepad. Wish me luck. So, hello everyone. Hope you're well. And I'm going to say hello now. This is going to be interesting because, as said, it is massive. Massive. And as such, 65 slides. It's going to be, I've divided into 4 parts already on here, but it's going to be divided into 4 long patrols to go out on Mondays for the next 4 weeks. So you should hopefully enjoy them. It's fun times. And I've included here a little bit of a thing because these are 2 books, which I will add in links down below when I get a chance. I've had a fun day, let's say, a fun day. And so this is what I've got to. There are links. But this was one of the most interesting quotes I found in those books, which was this. At the start of the 20th century, half of the world's ships were being made in the northeast of England, spread across 4 rivers. 4 rivers in the northeast of England were building half of the world's ships in the 1900 to 1910 period. Think of that in terms of industrial capacity. If you have one section of the UK is producing half the world's ships, and that's not even the only industrial area of the UK that makes ships. There are all sorts of other areas around the UK, and they're building ship-related infrastructure and ship-related components. It all has an impact. Right. So, now, as I said, I'm not using a mouse for this, so I'm having to use a mouse pad. So, excuse me if I'm not quite as dexterous as I normally am, as I can't do the scrolly. Hello, Jack Ray. Hello, Peter Dawson. Hello, Rick Salva. Hello, DH89. Hello, Carlman Gasberg. Hello, M35 Benvids. Hello, Vintage Car History. Ooh. Good luck with your mother-in-law's 89th birthday. Happy birthday to her from me. Hello, DG40. Hello, Anna Paul. Hello, GD Harmon. Well, look. Which is a better way of contributing to your work on a recurring basis? Through membership or through Patreon? What about contributing to for one-off projects? Hider in a non-recurring way. Honestly, if you're, it sort of depends. Normally, I say it depends on how much you want to give and whether you want to be involved in the whole Patreon discussions. And currently, we have live the suggestions of topics. In that case, Patreon's best. If you just want to contribute to the channel, then and you don't really like Patreon, because some people don't like Patreon, then membership is more than welcome. And membership means you get all those fancy emojis and tags next to your name. And if you want to contribute to one-off projects, Hider, super chats. There are super chats I get quite most of from the lovely people at YouTube. The vast majority of the super chat comes through to me. I haven't. There are some people who keep suggesting to set up a GoFundMe, but I don't want to do anything like that, or because of it feels a bit crass to say fund me to go on my lovely trip to see my dream ship. That the GoFundMe seems to be for people is for things that people in need. Whilst I really want to go and I really love it, that doesn't feel to me as that sort of fits that criteria. So super chats. Some people do one-off Patreon where they do a massive, they do a large chunk of in Patreon. They put it up for 1 month and then they put it down. Camel Ads, as of 1909, one of the most impressive facilities in the world at that time. And you can see they have a fair number of dry docks and basins for fitting out. So you'd have a fitting out basin where your ship is built and ready. You have also assembly works and all sorts of things. So these would build the components and bits of the ships. These dry docks would be where the ships would be assembled, often. Sometimes they'd be assembled on split plays, but sometimes they'd be assembled in dry docks. Or they'd be repaired in the dry docks. Hey, it all depended. It could all be going on and having fun. And then, of course, you have the outer basins. This is a huge capacity facility. Hello, Andrew. Slight tangent. Before we start, the Indian Navy has transferred the guided missile convoy NAS Curie, Leech of a class and first type building for preservation as museum ship, and a memorial dedicated to predecessor of the same name. That's cool. Predecessor, Type 14 frigate, was one of 2 ships lost to submarines in wartime since the end of World War II, and is the only Indian Navy ship lost in action. Cool. Hello, Albazaski. Hello, Matthias Slavic. And hello, George Newman. And hello, Patrick Clayton. Hello, Rick Basava. Hello, Vision. Hello, ye oldie Sarge. Hello, Derp Squad. Hello, Colin Cameron. Hello, Knight 6831. Hello, George Newman. Hello, Jonathan Burrow. Hello. Hello, Desert Foxo. Hello, Calvin Gasberg. Hello, Stephen Richards. Yes. Seneca, I doubt the Royal Navy operated 300 miles from the coast. They operated in some interesting places. Hello, Shepherds. 65 slides. Yes, this will definitely be 3 hours. I haven't eaten all day, so 3 hours it's going to be. Then I can get food. Hello, Severin Kurutu. Hello. Harufa. Hello, friend. I'm wondering, most important shipyards just last night. Good stuff. Yes, well, Camel Ads has come in because Camel Ads is one of the most important because of principally these 2 big docks. So again, it is being using mousepad control. If you look at the Tranmere Bay number 1 graving dock and the Tranmere Bay number 2 graving dock, you will notice how massive they are. You will also notice that they have multiple caissons. Now, caissons matter because caissons can be used to help the ships get in, help the ships get out, but also to extend docks. You often have gates which are far more fixed in terms of their length. Sometimes you have caissons, though, can be moved, and they are useful for being moved. Also, please note, there is a reason the 40-ton traveling crane next to Tranmere Bay number 2 graving dock is highlighted as it is. It matters. And then we have the River Tyne, which is one of those rivers in the northeast of England. And if we can see, this is full of names you should probably have heard me talk about. There's Hebburn, which I've talked about before. There is Swan Hunter, who you probably have heard me talk about before. There is Palmer's. There is Stevenson, Robert Stevenson and Co. Dry dock. And there is Wallsend Slipway Engineers Works. There is the Tyne Shipbuilding Works. And these is just a small part of the principal dry docks. And dry docks have a big bearing on ships. Because here is the thing. It doesn't matter if you have 90 warships if you have only 1 dry dock. Because if they get damaged, you can only repair 1 at a time. This is a big factor after the Battle of Jutland. We often forget about it. It's not just the ships which are massively damaged and knocked out for the whole of the war for the German Navy. Most of their ships which received any damage take ages to repair because they have got far less dry docks and far less facilities to repair them. Whereas the Royal Navy, most of the ships which are quickly repairable are in dry docks within days, maximum weeks, but usually days, and are out. And the reason they can do this is they have a lot of them. And I mean a lot of them. Vision, Hell Knight 6831. Oh, let's see, not a wolf. Hello. Agrosowski, hello. Hi, Doc. Steve Richards. Hello to your better half. Speaking of infrastructure from Cody85, thank you for the super chat, and thank you, Bijan, for the super chat. What do you use top natural harbors in the world, and what are the top artificial harbors? Ooh, that could be an entire video. But top natural harbors are places like in Southampton and various other things like that. Uruguay is actually particularly good. There are a fair number of artificial harbors, especially more modern ones, coming in. But it often depends on how you're grading. There are the ones which are the deepest, and that matters for dry docks because there's no point having a dry dock which can take a battleship if it's in a river which a battleship can't get up. This is a big problem. There are limited places in the world you can put in dry docks which are big enough for battleships. Britain is lovingly, happily, thanks to Mother Nature, overly supplied with suitable places vis-a-vis her size. But, and of course, what do we have in time? We have the wonderful Armstrong Whitworth, who I've already talked about in a video, and I've included some of these from the videos I've already included them in, but I wanted to talk about it in sort of more generic terms of where is this infrastructure? What the British have in infrastructure terms? I wouldn't say that about Swan Hunter. You said Swan Hunter got banned from Iron Shipbuilding. They didn't. If I understand it correctly, Swan Hunter went bankrupt, which is not unusual. There are a few good shipyard companies which go bankrupt. If I remember correctly, Swan Hunter. Yeah. They've now diversified into other things. But no. They design ships. They don't build ships anymore at the moment. In 2007, Swan Hunter's cranes, along with its floating dock and other equipment, were sold to Bharati shipyards in India, India's second largest private shipbuilder. The entire plant machinery and equipment from Swan Hunter was dismantled and transported to India over 6 months to be rebuilt there. Yeah. Sorry, Knights of Everyone. I know that's a cool thing to say and put out, but actually I think it's the lack of orders, and they got more money from selling them. So now they are a design center, and it has about 40 employees now and design ships for people. They also do engineering, design, and project management services to offshore renewables and subsea oil and gas markets. But I'm going to do a proper thing on Swan Hunter at some point. But Armstrong Whitworth are a good example here. They're founded in 1847, merged with Charles Mitchell to become Armstrong Mitchell and Company, having works that stretch for almost 2 kilometers on the River Tyne. Think about that. 2 kilometers. We go back to this. 2 kilometers along the River Tyne. And I can even tell you where those 2 kilometers are. Because if you look closely, you can see them listed. It's massive. Once you start getting into this, once you start getting into the infrastructure, and it becomes really almost a bit depressing. It's all disappeared. Because you'd think these supersized engineering feats would last for a while, but they don't. Seneca Nero. Didn't Armstrong Whitworth make sewing machines? Yes, they did. Armstrong Whitworth made everything. There are very few companies, I would say, that have built the modern world, but Armstrong Whitworth, especially once they joined with when they joined with Vickers in 1927, became, how do I put it? Okay, it's like if, well, Tesla make everything from flamethrowers to cars. So I suppose if Tesla merged with Lockheed Martin, or I suppose in defense terms these days, if BAE merged with Lockheed Martin. Or General Dynamics. Or all three of them merged together. Because that is the equivalent you're talking about where Armstrong, Whitworth merged with Vickers. They are that big. Proportionally for their time, they are colossal. Amrapan, were inland rivers the key to having so many effective dry docks? Did these rivers effectively expand the maritime space? It wasn't a uniquely British geographic advantage. What mattered for Britain is that you have, because of Britain's size and everything's nowhere, and it's all quite linked together by the sea. That starts off with a maritime infrastructure anyway. Britain is using a coastal highway for its for movement of goods around the UK from very early on, because it's far easier. It's kind of like the modern M25 or ring road principle. You can try and get stuff directly across London, but in the end, it tends to be easier to take things outside and round and then in. It's the same with Britain and its trade. Now, this helps grow its port in the maritime infrastructure. And this means that people are prepared to invest in it. I.e., lots of countries have estuaries, lots of countries have suitable geology and can build these things, and do. It's just Britain has a lot of money to invest in it, and because it becomes part of the British psyche to invest in it, they invest even more in it. I would argue that, for example, there is some healthy competition going on here. If you were considering a equivalent port somewhere in the world, there would be 2, maybe 3 docks, and they'd all be close together. If I quickly skip past Palmer's, this is Southampton. This is more what you normally expect in terms of a major docking facility, and I haven't even got on to London. Nebuchadnezzar, does Vickers Armstrong still exist? I think they're merged into BAE, but there are still some things. Georgian, seems like Harlan Wolff went bankrupt once or twice. A fair number of them go bankrupt once or twice. Armstrong Whitworth manages to avoid going bankrupt. They come close a couple of times, but they are big enough and diverse enough. It's very rare. They don't suffer the same way. And they really don't. And they are important. Palmer's Shipbuilding and Iron Company, they do go bankrupt. One of the last ships they build is HMS York. They build, and this is a company which is important enough, big enough, they've built battle cruisers. Palmer's, if I give you a list of ships they built, sorry, I keep going to the mouse to move the mouse and then remembering it's the mouse pad. Palmer's built HMS Queen Mary. They built battleships, including HMS Russell, which had been quite new, but also HMS Resolution. So they built an R-class battleship. They built York. They built Dauntless. They built tons of destroyers, monitors. They built Cerberus, General Wolfe, Gorgon, Marshal Ney, Marshal Soult. They built all sorts of other ships. And they go bankrupt. This is a list of shipbuilders the UK had in the 1890s to 1940s. Vickers Armstrong, of course. Appledore, Philip and Son, which were in Dartmouth. In Durham, there was the Furness Shipbuilding Company, and of course, Yarrow, as I just pointed out, Palmer's Shipbuilding and Iron Company. And as you see, if you looked at the map earlier, you'll see Palmer's is, if I point out, it's in this corner. If you look right at this side of the screen, and I managed to expand it out, you'll see Palmer's Shipbuilding and Ironworks has a dry dock on the River Tyne, which is actually still going today. It's AMP Tyne. And AMP are a cool group. They're also the people at Falmouth. There is Vosper Thornycroft. Well, Vosper and Company for a long part of that period. Henry Scar and Richard Dunstan are the yards in East Riding, Yorkshire. J. Samuel White on the Isle of Wight. There's Northfleet in Kent. In London, there's the Thames Ironworks and Shipbuilding Company, which go bankrupt in 1912. There's the London and Glasgow Shipbuilding Company, also based in London, and they go bankrupt in 1912, or rather, their London yard does. Camel Airs, of course, mentioned them. There is Smith Docks Company in Middlesbrough. Richard Dunstan also had a place in Thorn in South Yorkshire. In Southampton, there's Thornycroft. Again, A. Leslie Company in Tyne and Wear. Hawthorne Leslie and Company as well in Tyne and Wear. Although that's 1880. Hawthorne Leslie and Company is 1886. There's the Smith's Dock Company, as well as the Armstrong ones. There's William Duxford and Sons. There's Short Brothers of Sunderland. There's John Redland South in South Shields. Austin Pegasil in Southwick. In Sunderland itself, there's Batcher and Sons, John Crown and Sons, and of course Wallsend, as mentioned, Swan Hunter and Wellington Quay, the Cleveland Shipbuilding Company, who are there 1866 to 1984. Belfast, Harland and Wolff, of course. In Scotland, we have Hall Russell Company, we have Burnsister Shipbuilding Company, John Barrow Company, Denny, William Beardmore and Company, Fairfields, Robert Napier and Sons, Robert Steele and Company, Alexander Stevenson and Sons, Ferguson Marine Engineering, William Hamilton and Company, who do quite a lot of this period, Barclay Clure, Charles Connell and Company, they do till 1980. Yarrow Shipbuilders, 1865 to 1999. My dad worked for them at some point. The Upper Clyde Shipbuilders, who were around from 1968 to 1952, so they don't really count for our period. And then there's Clarendon Shipbuilding and Engineering Company, which were around 1874 to 1980. Grangemouth Dockyard Company, 1885 to 1987. Robs in Leith, which were 1918 to 1983. And Arlisa Shipbuilding, which were around in Troon and Ayr, and they're 1885 till 2000. And these companies are all ones which could build vessels of a Flower class or bigger. This is not including all the shipyards which can build smaller ships. This is the ones which build quite big ships. And that's quite a limited list. Because my theory about those lists is that's the list of ones which have got major contracts and are easy to date and provide, because that list comes from book chapter headings and cross-referenced with Wikipedia and various other news articles. It's been fun to put together that list. Right, high CPU usage, and that's probably due to still finishing off the almost done the transfer, 98%. Woohoo! Please get there soon. I want a mouse pad back. Right. Hello, yes, Glue. Hello. Right. Colin Cameron. Given its proximity to Glasgow, protected entrance of 19th century rail boom, I was wondering why the Gare lock was not stress-raised and militarised more than it was. Simply put, there are other things already there. There's only so much capacity. I'm sure if someone had had the money and the time, they'd have militarised it more or used it more, but they didn't. Senator, we don't see the list. No, you're not seeing the list, because the list is a massive, massive thing, and I've got another list coming to you today. Basically, it's not a complete list, so I'm not going to display it to you because it's not in any way, shape, or form complete. And I'm still working through them. This is Southampton. This is Harlan and Wolff in Belfast. And for those people who are wondering why I'm not just saying this is Belfast and mentioning Harlan and Wolff, let's expand the map out and have a look at this. Now, if you are noticing, there are two tiny packs of red, small docks up near up in Clarendon Dock. There they are. And by the way, if you see a workman Clarke and Company, yeah, that's one. That is a interesting branch of the family. They are fun. They are all so fun. Right then. Oh, hey, I have a mouse back. Oh, hallelujah. That makes my life a little bit easier. Well, a lot easier. A lot easier. And, yeah, that is pretty much Harlan and Wolff. If you're looking down there, that entire sort of isthmus in the river, it looks like, between the Musgrave Channel and the Victoria Channel, that's Harlan and Wolff pretty much, and Clarke, Workman Clarke and Company. It's massive. This is a massive scenario. Then we've got Swansea. I know there are several people here who are going to be interested in what's going on in Swansea. In Swansea, they also have some dry docks. They also have the new graving dock under construction and the various locks. Future extensions of the docks planned, current graving dock, all these things. Why is this all being discussed in 1909? In 1909, and these all maps mostly come from 1909, the Royal Navy is doing a survey of its infrastructure. Why? Because ships are getting bigger. And it knows it's going to need to do something about it. And they ain't going to make ships smaller because they're going to be smaller than other people's. So they're looking at all the dry docks around the world, around the UK, around the world, and this, trust me, this will be getting into the ones around the world and going, how big can we make them? Sim Richards, as an ex-coal miner, the Hetman Colliery supplied a coal mine just to the yard. Yes. That's another reason why you build where you do. Because the coal is close and the iron is close. And you need a huge amount of coal and iron for shipbuilding to make steel. But also to mold your steel, to shape your steel. Peter Dawson, Fawn, South Yorkshire. Yes, that's where one of the yards was. Nick Sunderland built some hulls and they went to Tyneside to fit out. Yes, because again, you've got fitting out docks. If you look at this big place, they've taken up, and they've got a good thing on this map is it shows where there used to be a timber storage, a tidal timber storage space, but it's been changed around because of the building in the Husgrave Channel, which has been designed with jetties, etc., so it can be used as a sort of fitting out dock. And that's the same with the Queen's Quay and Albert Quay. They can be used, the Albert Quay and the Queen's Quay, they can be used as fitting out docks. We go back to this area of Southampton. The outer dock, connecting to number 1s, number 2, and number 3 docks, can all be used, as a fitting out area. And there's the Empress dock with the Prince of Wales dry dock there. And there's the Trafalgar dock, if I'm not sure, at the top. These are all important things. And of course, Camelettes. Look at the size of the outer basin for fitting out ships. 14.36 acres of space. 10 acres in the inner dock, 16 acres in the outer dock, 18.5 acres in the Empress dock. These are massive, big docks. There's a new deep water dock being constructed at Southampton at that time. And the point is, these are massive amounts of space. But they're still limited. Swansea has huge amount of dock space, including all sorts of coaling arms off the King's Dock, which is important for a fleet. And here's Glasgow. Glasgow, as you can see, is divided into two. And yes, it is on its side for a reason, because, frankly, I was trying to make them all standardized so you could see them all. And if I had it up on the other way, it would come out short and look a bit weird. So here it is for you. You have graving docks, number 3, and potentially number 4 if they need it, because they can divide it into 2. They have graving docks number 1 and 2, and these are all Glasgow plans of 1, 2, and 3 docks technically, but they're the major docks. However, there is another graving dock other than these. In fact, number 2 in Scotstoun and Patrick. And again, they're telling you where Berkeley Curl is, which shows you how big a shipyard that is, how big important Berkeley Curl is. And of course, D&W Henderson & Co., which is another shipyard at the time. One of the interesting things that's made is there's another quote, which I almost put at the front, which according to one Royal Navy Admiral, when he was having a discussion with an American admiral, this might be entirely made up, but the discussion is supposed to take place in about 1912. And basically, the US Navy Admiral says, We're bigger than Germany. Why aren't you worried about us? And the Royal Navy Admiral turns around to them and goes, we've had more shipyards go bankrupt in the last year than you have shipyards in your entire country. And we've still got more than you by several miles. We can outbuild you, and we have the distance and time to do it. I think myself that is probably apocryphal. I don't think anyone actually said it. But it's also, to an extent, true. Also, I think the language sounds a bit too modern to me. And I'm not going to cite the historian who wrote it down and said this is what they found, because they found it and then said, I can't remember in which archive I found this. And I'm going, yeah. But I'm sure if you search around the internet, you can find the website I found it on. No, it's ignorant. Merger sounds all but inevitable if you're reading. It is quite massive. Oh, and this is, of course, another map of Glasgow. Because, I've shown you parts of Glasgow, but then there's more parts of Glasgow. And if you look at the one at the top there, so the one up here, that is the one there. Henderson and Co. And that shows you where their other docks are and where the lower harbour is. So there's another dry dock all the way up the River Clyde. But you can see all the docks and you can see the basins, piers, and all the space there for the ships. And also notice there's a 60-ton crane listed, 40-ton crane, coiling hoist, and a 150-ton crane as well. That's a big and powerful crane, plus another 76-ton crane. All the big cranes are being listed. Anyone would think the Royal Navy is being very worried about things. Also, by the way, if you've noticed, there is an interesting thing, because today we would spell showing S-H-O-W-I-N-G. We would spell it as showing. In 1909, this is published written by the Royal Navy, and it's published in an actual book as well. And it's spelt S-H-E-W-I-N-G. So, how language changes over time. Sure, I have said it before, but I think a gaming laptop might fit your use case. Potentially. I think that's pretty much what I've got in front of me at the moment. Desert Fox said, in other histories, I would probably have a gaming laptop sort of for wandering around with, and I'd prefer to have a desktop from the cooling perspective for office use. Desert Fox, in other histories and rivers, a company tends to be able to monopolize the shipbuilding and dry docks like the US, France, and Italy. Why does it not happen in the UK? Because they hate each other and they fight to the death. It sounds terrible to say, but that's actually true. If we look at this map, you've got about 4 different shipbuilders listed along here. You've got 4 massive dry docks in this map, and we know there's another 5th one further on down the river. The thing is, it's a competition. There is enough. Okay, for a monopoly to be avoided, there both has to be enough demand to keep multiple yards in viable income, but there also has to be enough. How to put this? Enough difference between those companies to keep them in viable income. They have to be able to produce quality. And this is the point. The British market was very cutthroat. Companies did go bankrupt all the time. if you were only as good as the last ship you built. So everyone had to put 100% into every ship they built, especially in the pre-Second World War period, pre-First World War period. They are especially in the 1900 1910 period. It's incredibly competitive, and you can make a lot of money. You can. And John, did you include the Royal Dockyards? No, I didn't mention the Royal Dockyards in the construction, but of course they mention it. They matter as well. But I was just talking about private shipbuilders in that list earlier. There are, of course, the Royal Navy itself, which builds its own ships. Hello, Frank Cusack. Atomic Theory 52. I noticed this hot topic, but I was reading some historical journals here in the US about Gallipoli. Historians were changing blame from Churchill to admirals for the failure. What is your take? Generals. If you want it to work, the troops have to be available and have to turn up on time. To an extent, you can blame Churchill for agreeing to the BEF being deployed to Europe, but to France. But to be honest, that's not so much of a problem when it comes to Gallipoli. By the time of Gallipoli, you've got the Australians, etc., and all these troops coming through. And if the army had said, yes, you can have them, the Navy would have waited for them. But when the army said the Navy they couldn't have them, the Navy was under orders to try and figure it out anyway, and Churchill was quite happy to go along with it, so they went and had a go at doing it anyway. And of course, that tipped off everyone that they were coming. Sure. Clearly, the RN can't be seen to have smaller battleships. Yes. That's what the benefits of watching on a phone. It doesn't have to be sideways. That is useful. Yale said, what's the difference between a graving dock and a dry dock? Well, graving docks tend to be slightly more useful, but graving docks provide a confined basin that can be drained, so the vessel can remain stationary in a dry environment while repairs are made. However, dry docks achieve once repairs within the graving dock are complete, the basin is then flooded, and the vessel can return to work. Dry docks achieve a similar objective by sinking below a vessel and then rising to surface with the vessel on top. So basically, technically, a graving dock, it's considered a graving dock. We usually, when you're talking about them generic, you just talk about dry docks. But technically, a graving dock is where you drain the water out, and it's in a confined basin. So, don't know. And dry docks are, to an extent, where you lift the vessel up. So that's why we tend to use floating dry docks. But also sometimes some graving docks are called dry docks, and some dry docks are called graving docks, even though they have slightly different styles of operation. Basically, the graving dock is the traditional form of a dry dock. And yeah. There are also options of ship lifts and slipways, which you can pull ships out of some small vessels on, and marine railways. But graving dock's the traditional version of a dry dock. All right. So, I hope John Hargreaves is watching this, because I think he should be enjoying it. I have tried to go all out. It's not just about building ships. It's really not. It's not just about building ships, although there will be an entire video Long Patrol Part 1 on the shipbuilding in the UK and the shipbuilding in the British Empire. Period. It's also maintaining the ships. It's fun. Jonathan Barron, casual flex and roast in one there. Yeah. Sure, I think it's more likely something along the lines of, well, Congress won't fund your Navy, was said. Probably. What I find funny is it's an American historian who said that. Oh, well, we'll leave it on one side. Anyway, Vision. The US had the Roach shipbuilding in Philadelphia going bankrupt in the 1880s. The Navy took over the shipyard to complete the ABC cruisers. Roach invested heavily in iron shipbuilding, won contract for steel warships. Dr. Fronis, Doctor, hello. See you in 40 minutes. See you. There's where I was at Clyde. That's where Byron was sailing up and down during air raid, firing say. She was there after she shot damage and hadn't completed orders. She went out anyway to shoot German planes. Well, you might as well. Ella and Cash, I'm still well. John Evans, one reason the RN would be less worried about the US than the Germany is the US had a far clearer requirement for a Navy and requires a two-ocean presence. Yes, which I've said myself before, that was an entirely different context. Especially as Germany was supposed to be a British ally. When your ally, who is pretty much landlocked, suddenly starts building a navy, which they theoretically don't need to fight anyone because, well, if the French attacked them, technically you could stop the French fighting them in seconds if you wanted to. So a dry dock is more a repair build vessel, while a graving dock is a piece of infrastructure. As we treat it these days, yes. Vision. So what Americans call a dry dock is a graving dock. Yeah. Desert Fox, a bit off topic, but what's the difference between a conventional shipyard and dock and a nuclear shipyard and dock? Right. It's to do with procedures and security measures, and also you have to have some facilities put in place to look after the reactors, basically. Reactors reactors are never able to be turned off. They can be turned down, but never turned off. So you have to have facilities to manage and maintain and watch them. Mancat, chat room, bring us like a Japanese sneak attack with a lack of likes. Clearly something we couldn't be bothered doing with our frigating flagship Hood. There are all so many issues. So, this is where Britain is around the world. Okay? There is, as I started off with saying this, you can build 100 battleships. But if you cannot repair them and maintain them, you will quickly find yourself without 100 battleships, but 100 very expensive pieces of rusting metal. And I have now run out of liquid. This is problematic, but I will solve it in the way of, what do you know? Well, as I have no water, despite me being on a diet, and trying to restrict my own brew intake, I'll just have to have it. That's just the only option. Terrible. Mitchell, maintaining ships is fun. After 20 years in the USN, there is so much sarcasm. Maintaining ships is, it is fun, and it's interesting, and it's necessary. And the thing is, these docks around all the world, they're important. At one point, the RN is actually considering sending a floating dry dock to the Falkland Islands. Mainly because they decide they can't build one there, but they could build one back in the UK and float it out there. And you're going to love Part 4, because Part 4 is all about floating dry docks. Part 1 and 2 are about the dockyards around the world. And if you thought I just have maps from 1909, the Royal Navy was just making maps of the UK port infrastructure, then you have no understanding of how adventurous the Royal Navy is. That's what a graving ship is, where you take a ship that's gone very old and is a useful anymore to bury it. No. Graving ship is when you bring a ship back to life. I'd also point out that a graving dock is, if you construct cradles, etc., correctly, can be used to great effect in terms of reducing the stress on a hull when you're maintaining it. Tom Fearon, I would like to have seen the British Admiral who supposedly said that statement from earlier say it to the Admiral King or to Chief of Naval Operations at the same time in 1921. Well, they wouldn't have said it then, would they? AT-52. Nice way. There is one thing, and this is the other point I always make about these quotes, if they are true. If it's said in 1911, 1912, then they're quite correct. If it's said in 1921, the world's a little different. But I'd still, on the edge of shipyards, say Britain has an advantage in the infrastructure and maintenance ones. Now, here is something. This actually, I will point out, comes from a website, but they give the table. I play around with the table and color coded it and done all sorts of things, so it makes it easy for you to spot. But this is done in 1909 as part of the survey. And you can see there is Neptune class. They're the latest class of battleships, latest battleship. And where can it be docked? Well, if it's top line, which it is, then it can be docked in Dock 15 in Portsmouth and in the new lock once it's finished building. And in Devonport, 8, 9, 10 and the North Lock. In Horbeline, in Gibraltar, in Docks 1 and 2. In Malta's, 5 and 6 and 7. 4 potentially, but only with the Cassian in the outer stop, not the normal stop. So that's slightly more risky. And in Hong Kong, Simon's Bay and Rosyth. But once you start looking down the list to go to those cruisers, that's when you get into an interesting time. Now, again, I'll put a link to that website down below. That's also where I got the pictures of the dockyards from. So if you want that link, that will be put. That all the links to these things will be put later, to the books, etc. We put in the description down below. They're not down there right now. As I said, I didn't have the time earlier today. I've been dealing with well, there's a reason I haven't eaten today. Let's put it that way. Oh, life is fun. So the UK was attracted to natural harbours and rivers like moths to a flame. Oh yes, they did like them. Jonathan Barrett, I wonder if the IJN had something like this for when they can build the Yamato class. More than likely, but honestly, if you consider Britain turned around, and this is one of the things. Okay, Camel Air. If we go back to this quickly. The Royal Navy turned round to Camel Airs at 3 times between 1905 and 1950 and asked them, can you make it bigger? Every time Camel Air said, well, if you have enough money, we will do. And that is why it's the size it is today. It isn't quite as big as they were considering getting it up to. But at several points, they are looking at building it up to 1,000 and even 1,200 feet long. They were thinking about graving docks and etc. that big. This is the other point, though, when you start looking at it. Yes, we still do slipway launch of ships, and we often still we still do that. But sometimes, especially for heavier, bigger ships, when you are fitting them out and putting them together and putting in very heavy things like turrets, etc., you actually want them put into a graving dock. You want them launched in light form, i.e., hull, engines in there, no propellers on the shafts, but shafts in place, those sort of things. Then you take them into a graving dock. You put them up on blocks of wood. Make sure those blocks of wood have been positioned in there. Then come in, bring the ship in, put it down on that cradle, drain the water out, fit the propellers, fit the superstructure, then flood the dock, and then start fitting the turrets. Because turrets are very heavy, and it helps if it's actually displacing water to stop the hull going boop. Now it's a ground incomparable to being built at Camel Heads. Yes, it would have been the only one big enough to do it quickly enough. The other option was Glasgow. They were considering extending that graving dock. Bum bum. And I thought you'd like this because here you go. Outline sketch of modern dry dock from 1909, explaining the Cassian at the outer stop, the sliding Cassian. There'd be an outer that would be the furthest you could put a ship in. Is the outer stop. You'd have an inner stop, outer stop, and entrance. Large section through the middle of the dock. The dock was often wider in the middle and around much of it. It was often in a shape which would be, how do I put it? The limitation of of ships getting in there was the entrance and the length of the dock, i.e., the longitudinal length and latitude of the entrance. To allow space for operations, you often have a stepped scenario in the middle of the dock rather than straight walls. And if you ever go and see graving docks, and a video of M33 shows this, you see the stepping in the dock going up. And that was quite simply to make it easy for people to access the things they needed to access. So, Scott, the problem with building a dry dock in the Falklands is that no matter how many pumps you built in the weather would mean it still would never be a dry dock. Sure, Admiral Kuznetsov. I will be getting to Kuznetsov at some point. I will be discussing that and why that is problematic. Jim Roscoe, right, one does not want to hear the hull to go ping. No, you don't. It's one of those things. There have been a few battleships which, if you look at their delays and their thing, you go, hang on, that ship was pretty much built and then suddenly it's delayed. And they and you sort of look at the reason and you go, when they loaded the turrets, they tried to be clever when they were loading the turrets. And they managed to make the hull go ping and cause the constructor to have a panic attack. Yeah. Turrets are very heavy assemblies. They are massive things. They don't tend to be craned in one go, apart from the top part. The big, really big, heavy armored bit at the top comes in, and it's a sort of loading it, putting into a ship is okay. I'm not sure everyone's played, but there's this game called Buckaroo, where some of my cousins love this one. And the thing is, you have this horse which will buck, and you have to try and load it with the items and not load it so carefully you don't set off the springs, which make it go boom. And it's like that when you're putting a turret out. Now, Haulboyline. I wanted to talk about this one because it's kind of a special one. This is the extent of effort the Royal Navy will go to build it, to build a dockyard. In 1860s, a Royal Navy dockyard is established in Haulboyline in Cork, County Cork, in Ireland, Southern Ireland, for warship repair and construction. Okay, it's a backup line for dealing the French in the Channel. To accommodate the requisite industrial complex, the island is doubled in size to around 60 acres. So that is pretty much an artificial island. The basin is constructed, which you can see bisects the island. And at first, they start off with a 408-foot dry dock. Eventually, just before the First World War, that is extended to a 600-foot dry dock, or 180 meters. And I have no doubt if Ireland had stayed as part of the United Kingdom, that could well have found itself being extended even further, because it was actually considered a very viable place for extending it. And when I say extending it, you can actually see how they've extended it, because if you look at the island, you can see a straight line. There. And then you can see there's a bit now poking out. And guess what their plans were for extending it further? It was just gonna grow. By early 1900s, it was called the Royal Alexandra Victualling Yard, and contained coal fuel depot as well as a naval hospital, although it's a converted storehouse. John Shea, when you talked in such a high tone when saying ping, or more likely cackle, that tells me worrying that this happened before. We have very bad results. Yes, it has. My dad had some stories about ships going ping. To be fair, my dad's stories about ships going ping were oil tankers, and he was involved in the construction of some of the first generation of ultra-large crude carriers, etc. And someone decided that you didn't have to be as careful, that because they're modern ships, they didn't have to worry about that. And well, yeah, it went ping, as he put it. And I'll never forget. The reason I laugh a bit about the story is that we were talking about that. He was talking away. We were driving along, and we went over one of the early speed bumps. And we were in I think the car was an Ambassador. I think that's what my dad had at the time. And it got caught on the speed bump and was sort of stood there. And my mum's response was, well, you're the heaviest in the car, Douglas. You have to get out, because otherwise it's going to go ping. She's a good mum. Right, so this is a map of the dockyard, both as it was originally and as it was extended to become. There is a slipway for pulling up smaller ships and boats, and there is a dock, which is being expanded as they draw this. Also tells you where the cranes are. The Irish took it, and I think it's now the headquarters to their navy, I think, from memory. So anyway, I wonder what the UK at the time would have built if it got the mile-long Mitsubishi dry dock. Oh, well, let's put it this way. My honest belief is that if the British had had the yard space, if their yards had been bigger, then their battleships, etc., would have been bigger. Because every generation they max out and then they build up bigger yards. Every generation they are maxing out the yards, and it's only because the reason the British government don't have to worry about it so much is because the yards themselves are so in so much competition with each other for government contracts that they do the work themselves. Whereas with other countries, it's basically the government's going to have to pay for this to be extended. Occasionally with Camel Lairds, because usually they're the ones who get the job of extending first slipways and yards and etc. And slipways are slightly easier to extend, slightly easier to extend than dry docks. But if you don't have the dry docks, there's no point having the slipways, because if you can't maintain it, there's no point building it. And that is the interesting thing, because if you had, let's put it this way, the Queen Elizabeth class to this day are limited by the size of the dock space they can be built in, the dry dock facilities, which is why they are the length they are. If our dockyard facilities, if we had more dry docks, which were an extra, I don't know, 40, 50 meters long, 150 feet extra, roughly, then you would be looking at a very different scenario in terms of Royal Navy ship length, even to this day. This is the legacy and impact, because we haven't been investing and growing in infrastructure, and the same as the Americans at the moment. You know, everyone hits this hard ceiling of your own infrastructure. You need to either invest in it and grow it, or work within the limitations of it. Chatham Dockyard, I often get asked by people going, "Oh, well, you know, why does Chatham decrease importance?" Because you can't build anything bigger than you've got there in terms of dry dock facilities. They've got some very good dry dock facilities for the 1890s and 1860s. But once you're into the 1920s, Chatham isn't so good, and it starts to go down. Good luck, Melanie 1640. Oh, there is a Russian bot. Hello. Bye-bye. I'm reporting you for being unwanted commercial content. You might be you might be something worse than that, but you know. Okay. That's good. Probably not the keel, but one of the longitudinal beams higher up in the hull, as they get more tension than the keel as it just bends slightly. The keel breaks. Easier to start again. Yeah. Hello, Glenn McGlivery. Woohoo! There is supposed to be a button down there that if you press, there's a subscribe button, but there is also a notifications bell next to it. Now, YouTube on standard will set it to tailor notifications, which will only notify you of ones which you thinks you'll be specifically interested according to what you do on your logarithm and its assessment of you. If you set it to notifications on all, it should notify you every time I go live, 5 minutes before, 10 minutes before, and when I actually go live, and 5 minutes after I've gone live. It should do. I think that's the system as it was explained to me in a video I was watching the other day, which YouTube sent out to people who content providers. I think that's what I understood about it. But no, I was going through the YouTube videos they send out to people. Hey, John Tuff. So this is Chatham. It's a wonderful place. And, you know, there's that one. But this is Devonport. This place is Devonport. And if you go to modern Devonport, it's surprisingly not that dissimilar. There's a few bits more been added, but there's also been a fair bit lost, sadly enough. You'll notice that in Devonport, most of the docks connect between number 5 and number 4 basin, which is kind of a useful thing because it means you can control the flow of water into and out of those docks far easier. There's also the North Lock, which can be used as a dry dock or a graving dock, and there's dock number 9, which is, or is that number 8? It's number 8. Dock number 8, which can be used, which is used for large ships, but is basically for the longer term repair. One of the questions I often get from people is going, well, why would you have a dock which is a through and through? And I go, well, that's easier and quicker to get ships in and out of, especially if you have a double basin scenario like Devonport does. That's actually a very efficient thing for ships which are doing quick maintenance. So if I've got a ship which has got long-term maintenance, that goes in the top one. If I have ships which require standard maintenance, which is going to take a couple of days, they go in the middle ones. If I've got a ship which requires emergency maintenance now, the odds are I'm going to have kept the lock dock clear. If it'll fit in there, it'll go in there, and I'll do the emergency maintenance and get it to a position at which it either is floating and can sit in the basin and wait until the number 9 and number 8 dock is free, or the other number 9 or number 10 docks are free. And that is actually a very efficient system. And by the way, whilst the ship's in there, if I need to, I've got a second entrance to the basin over here, which I can move the Cassian on, and I can get the ships in and out over. I prefer not to use that because it's more difficult to get the ships in. It's a tougher channel. But that's viable for me. So that's a major ship facility. I live in New Zealand. It's 8 a.m. I just came back from work, milking cows. Oh, cool. Well, you and my cousins, because my cousins will be probably doing the evening milking about now. So, salute to you. And before anyone asks, my cousins, I call them cousins, but they are families who are basically the next door neighbours to my family in Cornwall. And the families never intermarried, but we're all their aunties and uncles and all those things. Anyway, they have a herd of Jerseys in Cornwall, Jersey cows. And yes, I have helped on occasion. But no, in the UK, we don't cowboy on horseback. Usually we just walk behind them going, come on, ladies, come on. It's a lot less cool than the movies or the American Westerns. It's fun, though, but it's nowhere. It's not the coolness factor. Pembroke Dock. Now, this is a slightly more interesting one because if you look at this one, it's slips. There is one dock, there are several slips. So they can pull in a few other ships, but they have to be smaller ships to go into the slips. Or they can be constructed there. So mostly this is about shipbuilding. This is why you have all the slips, but the dock is there for maintenance. And there is a lot of slips here. A lot of construction space. Read Russian mods. What do you think that since Vlad brought out everything and the kitchen sink, Doc will see some more activity in the UK? Potentially. I could be 472. When you make the island bigger to make your dry dock bigger, that's what I call commitment. Well, it's the Royal Navy. They like the idea of having an island. They can defend it, and this is the thing: is they're not just happy. They're not just. It's not only is Ireland an island itself. It's completely surrounded. Its own. They're an island of. They're expanding an island off the south coast of Ireland as their base. So it's double. It's an island that's squared. I was sent to an SSN in 1988. There was an overhaul in Portsmouth Shipyard in Virginia, I think. They were replacing the docks pumping system that dated back to Teddy Roosevelt at the same time. It worked. I think if a dozen rivets snapped, but there are still hundreds of them holding that hull section, you better take it as a strongly worded note. There are lots of people who get very worried when these things start snapping. Anyway, we use paddocks bigger than much of the UK, but smaller than drovers from America or Australia. Yeah. There's something. Well, good luck, Melanie 640. You'll catch up soon. If you're a bit further north, both Australia and UK, you need to look out for a large white floating masses on the roads. Oh, they're fun. How many of these yards had to buy parts of ships, or was it only Armstrong Vickers that could make warships out of raw materials? No, pretty much all these yards had the facility to make them out of the raw materials. They might have to buy engines in some cases, but then there were other suppliers who built the engines. There were actually industrial complexes which built the engines. If we go back to Harland and Wolff, Belfast. Okay. You have Workman Clarke Company next door, and they also built shipyards, as I've talked about before. They were in 1995. It was the UK's fourth largest shipbuilder. It built transatlantic liners for Cunard and Alfred Holt. And in the First World War, as I've talked about before, it was acquired by Northumberland Shipbuilding Company and etc. They built their own. They built a lot of their own things. They built their own engines, and they built their own pretty much everything else themselves. Now, at one point, the reason I brought them up is because at one point, because of them being next door to each other and because of deadlines, they actually came to an agreement that Workman and Clarke and Company gave one of the engines they were building to Harland and Wolff, and Harland and Wolff gave an engine they were building to Workman and Clarke Company, because Workman Clarke Company were delayed in one of the larger engines they were building, and Harland and Wolff were delayed in a different type of larger engine they were building. And that meant they could both complete their ships on time by just swapping the engines, going, hang on, we're ahead on these engines, behind on this engine. So if I give you this engine, which I'm ahead on, and I can still catch up and make my delivery date, and you give me that engine, which you're ahead on and can still catch up and make your delivery date, then we can make our delivery dates on these ships as well. Hey, this is the thing. These are not. I cannot stress it strongly enough. These are not like the shipyards we have to an extent today, where the parts are brought in and the things are brought in. No, it's a lot more. And this is Portsmouth. Now, for those of you who don't know, Portsmouth is pretty massive. But if we were talking about it, then HMS Victory and that lot are all sort of down near the the ship basin #1 and that area. That's roughly where we'd be talking about it and talking about them being. I think, in fact, if I'm not mistaken, I think dock #2 is what contains HMS Victory, from memory, and dock #1 is what has M33 in it. But I might be wrong on that one. They might have changed things around. They did quite a lot. As said again, shooing. I'm so going to use that on my students at some point to wind them up. But there is the new lock, which is another dock facilities. There is a deep dock, dock #1. There's all sorts of. Has a lot of dock facilities because this is important for keeping the fleet going. This is one of the advantages the RN has in World War I in supporting the Channel Fleet. Basically, the Channel Fleet, it's always got its maintenance needs met because all the stuff is there. It's the ships up north which have the trouble because most of their facilities up there are shared with commercial companies. Senator, how many of these? Oh, hang on. There's some stuff on ATVs. Not a wolf. Ours are less cool than movies too. Though the ATVs are fun, and there are some who use halos. Yeah, but as I understand that there are quite a fair number of people who have decided that the ATVs and the all-terrain vehicles, that is, and the halos, the engines can upset, especially cows when they're in calf. And so they prefer to actually use horses because that disturbs the cattle less and it stresses them less. And as we all know, cattle are beasts which do not like to do well under stress. Just don't stress them out. Then they won't charge you. Scott, did you see Chieftain's video on U.S. Army doctrine? Armor doctrine. He has a line from Senior. When the cowboys are herding from fords, perhaps we should reconsider use of the horse. Interesting. Seneca Nero. Royal Navy and Random Islands are love stories all the time. True. Glenn McVeigh, as a manager of Human Resource Department, you'll sort my things meeting specifications. We hope to improve production with required work during mealtime. Oh, that'd be fun. Vision. Fairly decent book, Vision. Ship Must Die by Douglas Reedman. So basically, if you don't have the graving dock size, don't build anything bigger. Pretty much. And this, of course, is what it's a Rosyth. So here's the difference. Portsmouth, opposite the French. Pembroke. Devonport. All opposite, fairly good yards, but, not exactly the right space. And then Rosyth. Okay, what have we got here? Okay, so we're supporting the entire Grand Fleet based off a lock dock, oh sugar, and a single dry dock, oh sugar. And look at that coaling point space, oh sugar. I see problems. Well, there is an emergency entrance to the to the basin, but that suggests that the channel there is 36 foot of water at high tide. Planning showing Dock Basin Act under construction, due for completion in 1916. Oh. Of course, Rosyth to this day is very important for the Royal Navy and very important for many of us in terms of construction and what's going on for Britain. But yeah, you can. This was not a good prospect for World War One. This was not a good prospect. This was due for completion 2 years after World War One began. But this is another point. This is the thing. The Royal Navy's building these sort of facilities. There are these facilities being built. Vintage Car History. I spent some time in Mare Island Shipyard Base back in the 1980s. To be honest, I wasn't impressed with facilities there. What's your opinion on Mare Island? Do I have a map of Mare Island coming up? Well, the trouble is for Mare Island is if I remember correctly, it was built in the 1850s. And the most recent dock was created in 1942. It was completed in 1942, and that's dock number 4. So my theory is that, frankly, they haven't invested much money since. Because, in the nicest way, they built a 226-meter long one in 1910, and they built a 211-meter long one in 1940. I would have. I'm surprised they haven't built it, made it up as bigger and more advanced than it is. It's one of those things. Mare Island Naval Shipyard, I know from some of the accounts, was when it was built was one of the best in the world. When it was built, was considered one of the best facilities, purpose-designed facilities in the world. But the trouble was, now if you're talking about recently, it's suffered from what is the major power disease, which is we have all this infrastructure. Why invest in any of it? And here we go. We're now into. That's Rosyth. This is Sheerness. Now, Sheerness, look at those lovely docks, but also look at accessing those lovely docks and look at their shapes. Anyone think that the docks 1, 2, and 3 were designed for a different time and period and a different type of ship? But they are quite large. Also, let's be honest, getting into docks 1, 2, and 3 is actually quite easy from the entrance. But getting into dock number 4 from the River Medway, let's put it this way. I would want to be very careful about it. And dock number 4 and dock number 3 are 2 of the biggest. Stephen Richard, hey Doc, what's the biggest dry dock in the UK? I think it's one of the Southampton ones. I think it could be the Trafalgar dock. Let me see, the biggest graving dock in the UK. Let me just check. The largest one is actually Seaton Port in Teesside. That's the largest graving dock in the UK. Yeah, there are a few others like it. But that's according to... oh, yeah. Let's see. We have Seaton Port, which is 376 metres in length, but Belfast is 335. Number 1 dock Rosyth is 310. Inchgreen Dry Dock is 305. Number 5 dock at Birkenhead, Camel Lads, is 289 metres. And they're planning on upgrading the Portsmouth, apparently, to about a 310-metre facility. But, you know, this is the problems with these things. You need a bigger facility for the shipyards. Honestly, we need some in the region of 360 to 370 meters, because if we'd had them, that would have made us a lot more secure in terms of building ships. That you'd have probably seen Queens of Class being built slightly longer. And the largest graving shipyard in the world is, well, the mayor is in Taiwan, which is 950 meters long, and that's the Kaohsiung one. And then there's the Dalian one in China, which is 700 meters long, and the Gunsan one in South Korea, which is 700 meters long. So yeah, the largest ones in the UK are less than half the length, well, about almost a third of the length of the largest in the world now, and were some of the largest in the world when they were built, and roughly half the length of most ones in the top 10. How the mighty have fallen. And Gibraltar. Well, here you go. Here's some facilities for you. And as you can see, very easy to get into those 3 docks from the sort of basin area as they attach behind the mole. There's the new mole extension, the detached mole, and all the other facilities. There's also slips, and there's 4 docks. And to an extent, it becomes a major facility in terms of Gibraltar once you start considering all the dockyard space. Okay. But of course, how would subcontracting compare today? About the same, more streamlined? About the same, honestly. There's swings and roundabouts. 1991. How many shipyards were let to go bust just because the government was incompetent and failed to anticipate USA with cheap Liberty ships strangling the market? The government, in nicest way, for the government to have anticipated the Liberty ships, they would have had to anticipate World War II. And they were trying to anticipate World War II, but they didn't expect it to go at the same time it was, and etc. If World War II had been later, then you'd have seen that actually potentially Canada would have become a major shipbuilding power, because if you consider how well they did on the shipyards they already had, the Victory ships, etc., you could have seen a very different scenario to turn on. You could see them and America equally strangling the world with the supply of merchant ships. Mission. There was a problem for Rhodes Shipyard in the 1970s. It built a whole plant, including ironworks, to build ships. US Navy in 1880s wants all steel ships. No iron parts. Rhodes went bankrupt, moving to steel. Yeah. I think they were bought by the US Navy to finish off the ABC cruisers. Seem to remember. So anyway, cows with cows just want to preg them, which means dogs stay on the chain for some months in the spring. They do. Senator Kinnear, on winding up colleagues, one of my professors taught us a concept as a snail. That concept was developed by another professor at college, and he doesn't like it being called a snail. So he gets his students to wind up a co-worker. I do something similar. We'll leave it on one side. And as a Voxer, did the original sink ports in Kent make ships at this point to the RN? And were they still relevant as fleet bases alongside Portsmouth? To be honest, they were part of it, but they weren't at this point weren't as big a part of it as they had been. But Southampton, Portsmouth, Plymouth were all there. Sure, that looks barely sufficient to house a cruiser and destroyer squadron during peacetime, let alone wartime operational base. It's fun. I think you're talking about Rosyth. That's fun. And Scuddy 85. The emergency channel at Rosyth was 30-ish feet of water and neutral tide. Yep. Mare Island is not a Navy base today. No. That doesn't surprise me, but I still would have liked to put some infrastructure there. Old Richard, I worked in Mare Island for 3 years as a ship superintendent. Post World War II, it was essentially a nuclear submarine yard until its closure. Alexander Simon, Harlan Wolf has 2 large dry docks well used by the Royal Navy historically. Yes, it does. If we go back to where I was talking about them earlier, and that's the Glasgow one's Belfast. You can see the Harlan Wolf dry docks, the Alexander dock, and the new graving dock, I think it is called. They didn't have a name for it then. Glad it was given a proper name though. Alexander Dry Dock is always good. I don't know. My notes for this are massive. This is why it's going to be 4 long patrols, and I'm recording it tomorrow because it's colossal to answer all the questions and talk it through. And as I said, it's divided up into 4 parts. Ryan Cash, I'm guessing the movement of ships in the basin is via tugboats, or is there room for that? In some basins, tugboats be used. In other basins, they would use their own. They would literally use trains, steam engines. Dockyard engines would be doing the job, or they would use winches, etc., to move the ship around. It was done as slowly as possible, so you didn't want a lot of power. John Shea, are Sheerness docks 1, 2, 3 different time, like Age of Sail time? They are very much older. Yes, they are sort of Age of Sail, I think, from their shaping. There's a debate as to how old they are, because I would say they're built on the templates of older docks, and that's why that's their age and their shaping. But there's also a debate about their shaping, whether that was okay. Sometimes they have different ideas about what you want to build your shape like, and that causes a fun debate. So, Royal Navy Dockyards Part 2. It's Part 3 of 4 of the whole thing, but you know. Pete Dawson, how large are the dry docks? The US Navy, US has one which is 2,940 feet, 90 feet by 210. By 3. Well, the dry docks, as said, were where they're built. The largest ones in the world are listed as roughly 900 meters, which is about right. Because it's 10 feet for 3 meters. So divide by 3, and it's about 3,000 feet. Yeah. And that's in Taiwan. Alexander built a lovely cruise ship in Belfast. Then we let the English sail it and sunk. Terrible. Vintage Guy Street, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Bath Ironworks was the only shipyard to build a branded motor vehicle in their case, commercial steam trucks. They made 3 and they were not successful. I have no idea on that one. Commercial ones. We have discussed this about before, and I have done some more digging on Camel Laird's. And what I understand is when they were building some of the cruise liners, etc., and I think Harlan Wolf did something similar. They got chassis and engines basically from a car, well, chassis at least and engines from a car manufacturer, built the carriage on top and the carriage work sort of did it all out of wood very nicely at that time, and then gave them to their own directors and to directors of some of the firms they were supplying the ships to match up the liners as a way of basically selling their wares. But I'm not 100% sure about the story, because what I did was I I said my dad had told me this, and that's quite true. And then I went and called up one of my dad's friends who worked at Camelot's with them and said, "Do you remember this?" "Oh yeah, we always used to talk about that. We had pictures of them in the break room." "You did?" "We did." "Do you know where those pictures are now?" "No idea." "Oh, great." So, if anyone does know whether this is true or not, whether those pictures are real, whether those pictures are just something which they imagined because they saw these pictures of these cars and they presumed the cars were that was the story behind them, I would love to know. And I'm sure vintage car history would as well, because if we manage to find out between the two of us what the actual history is going on there, I will get VCH and we will try and do a joint long patrol looking at them, or recorded video. That will be a deal. I'll add in the Bath Ironworks steam trucks as well, because they sound cool, and I like the idea of a steam truck. The issue with shipyards is they're expensive to develop the infrastructure, and then they become obsolete as new, bigger ships are developed. True, which is why you need to keep increasing the size of that graving dock. Hackenberg, hello. Every time we took the 37mm archipelago ship, up on the slip, she went ping and twang and boing. Every spring overhaul, she needed structural welding after the slip. Yeah. Oh. Run Cash, what's the usual route getting past the government bean counters? Well, it depends. The trick is to either get the Department of Work and Pensions, or whatever its version is, to suggest it's good. And the Department of National Works is always a good organisation to have. If you have a Department of National Works, then things like shipyards being upgraded can be a very good thing to start organising. Leo Gazebo, that got me thinking, what's the oldest dry dock in the world? I think that's one of them. Hang on. There is one in Italy, which is very old. Ooh. The first early modern European and oldest surviving dry dock still in use is that commissioned at HMB Portsmouth, and it's the one which currently holds M33. So, if you want to go see it was commissioned by Henry VII in 1495. Still to this day, and it's the one which currently HMS M33, the Monitor, sits in. And apparently that is the oldest surviving dry dock. Not the oldest in the world, the oldest surviving dry dock. Because that's been around since 1495. In other words, don't take this the wrong way, but that dry dock is older than some countries. And I'm not just doing the usual example of ones. There are, in the nicest way, if we start thinking about countries which have become around since 1495, it becomes quite a long list of countries. That's it. If things had gone better, how much of this dockyard space would be here and now? Would it be here and now? How would it benefit us now? Well, it only benefits you if you have the ships to use it. So if you have a larger merchant marine and well, one of the things if you do have this dry dock space still going around, then you have a lot of infrastructure there to maintain ships. But the trouble is, modern ships are bigger, so you either have to build it bigger and enhance it. So if you've managed to keep it up with current climes, if you've enhanced it, made it bigger when necessary, etc., then it could be very useful. If you've let it just sit there, it's probably going to be empty and just going, oh, we're too small. Vintage Car Street. Problem is that buying a chassis and doing whatever you want from it was not uncommon in World War I era. However, the car was still not proprietary to the shipyard, just the body they put on it. When the shipyard actually designs and builds a motor car, that's a whole different ball of wax. True, but it's quite. I think it's quite interesting if what they have done and who they bought it from, and that sort of thing. And also, I'd quite like to see the carriage work. If I could find pictures of the interior, that'd be cool. Jeremy, sorry for being late. Been attending the CNC's birthday dinner. As always, I must. Sounds cool to me. As at Foxo, did the RN suffer a repair yard shortage in World War II? If so, why? These dry docks, despite being closed, are still geographical features and should be reopenable again. They didn't suffer that much of a repair yard shortage in World War II. Most of them were open and in use. This is the thing. The shipyards might go bust. Dry docks rarely do. Usually someone's more than happy to buy them and start using them. And it worked. It worked. Right, I'm going to be... I was going to say I was going to expand... I'm going to expand this, and I've heard a funny noise outside, so... Give me a second while I go check for Foxy or Fluffy Research Assistant. We're going to pick which one we think it's going to be. Foxy or Fluffy Research Assistant. Or it could be Fluffy Research Assistant Foxy. Now that wasn't sensible, was it, Alex? Going out and helping the fox in socks. Seriously, that fox is coming. I swear that fox is starting to come around for the biscuits. Oh well, it works. If you can't win with lead, win with silver. Mm-hmm. So don't worry, it was Foxy. It was the Foxy Research Assistant. Oh. Germany and France are both younger than the dry docks that build ships to fight them. Yep. My gosh, no way, we can't believe they're flagging that up big time when you see the small ship, the big gunner. Cash, no way. Can't believe they weren't flagging that up big time when you see the small ship, the big gun at Portsmouth. No, they weren't, but that should be flagged up a bit. It probably was actually used at some point for the Mary Rose, which is also not far away from it. All right. There's no snow anywhere in the UK at the moment, as I think. It might be some in actually North Wales and there's some in I think there might be some in the mountains. Right. Again, I've got this up again because I want to really talk about the sort of this is the modern dry dock in 1909. And it tells you a lot about what they were there for. And also how they worked. So, Hong Kong Naval Yard in 1909. This is the point. In 1909, this is what Britain has out there. And this is something you have to consider as an advantage for the Royal Navy. Across the world, the Royal Navy has a Royal Navy dockyard in Hong Kong with a dry dock that they can make use of whenever they want. Well, no. You see, the thing is, my long-held theory is that foxes are not as different from dogs as they sometimes try and make out. There's also train yards and dockyard infrastructure build tanks and artillery guns in World War I or II. Was this accepted or exceptional? No. When in business was slow, did the shipbuilders manufacture other things? If we go back to Armstrong Whitworth, they're a good example. These were heavy engineering firms. But if you look at Armstrong Whitworth as an example of one of them, and as I said, I'm in every sort of occasional videos, I'm doing profiles of these firms and adding them in. They built aircraft, armaments, bridges, cars, cranes, locomotives, ships. They think they also build tanks and all sorts of other things. And then there's Vickers. So yes, most of these heavy engineering firms would build whatever they could build. If they had thought it would make a profit, they'd go for it. If there was a market for it, they'd build it. And here is Bombay. There you go. And again, it gives you the details. Entrance lock to Alexandra Dock. And there is the Meriwether Dock. There is the Hughes Dry Dock. And there is a sort of lock entrance for Alexandra Dock, which they're sort of considering using, but they would prefer not to use because Alexandra Dock doesn't actually have a second entrance. Then there's Victoria, the Princess Dock, and the Carring Basin. Karnak. Sorry. Keep pronouncing it with a G on the end for some reason. Whereabouts the dry dock? Well, this was in the Naval Yard, and I'll make sure the link is down below for the British Empire and Dockyards graphics, so you can go and find those. I'll add that in now, actually, while I've been talking about it. You will find all sorts of stuff down there, and you'll be seeing a lot of these graphics coming up, and I'll be talking them through, especially the long patrols. But yeah, this has... This is the Hong Kong... this is the Hong Kong Naval Yard, not Kowloon or Taiko. They are different yards, and that's the thing. This is the Naval Yard, which has its own dry dock in, but they also had dry docks in Kowloon, and they had a dry dock in Hong Kong Waters East in what they called Taiko Dockyard, which had a dry dock in Cassian. Not a particularly large one. So this is the plan of the Naval Yard. And the Naval Yard, had its own basin, its own workshops, its own boatless basin, War Department, Admiralty stores. This is a very, very big dockyard and facility for the British in the Far East. And it matters. And of course, in 1909, Singapore doesn't really get a mention. It's really not one of the important ones, but it will, of course, grow up to be one of the important ones. Especially when we get into our next section. Desert Fox, did the RN try and make money by leasing out their Royal Navy shipyards if not using them? They were always using them, as I think Darius Rautsky said. Vintage car, yes, Armstrong Whitworth built cars from 94 through to the end of World War I. However, what they really did was buy an existing company, Wilson Pilcher, and built upon what was already there. Yes, but they did invest a lot of their engineering and know-how in it. Callum Gasved, please do stop there. Cash is another dimension of having a Laura of dry docks, not just for repair, but in times of war to allow rapid expansion of Navy. They do help. Graving docks do help with that. But most, it's going to sound strange. How do you want to rapid response expansion of your Navy? If you've got to replace all your ships and you can't repair them, then you're not going to expand. You're going to have to build that much more. The more ships you can repair, the better. Because if you can repair a lot of, let's say you can repair 90% of your damaged ships, you will therefore get a lot further on in terms of in the war. It's one of the things that I always point out. If you look at the British losses in World War II, if barring, I think it's HMS Spartan, is it, or something? One of the cruisers. Basically, if you get past 1942 and you're a major ship larger than a destroyer, your odds of surviving are, well, Tribal class destroyer and above, your odds of surviving go almost to 100%. They still get damaged, but they get repaired quite quickly and put back into service, which is why the Royal Navy keeps increasing in numbers. Because, yes, it loses ships, but most of its ships get repaired. And therefore, it's built. The amount of losses it's having to cover with its new construction is far less than if it didn't have the repair facilities. And that's how you stay a big navy in a long war. It takes time to get your construction up. Even for the British, it's 1942. For the Americans, it looks far quicker because they get it also by 1942. But the thing is, the British have been in war since 1939. The Americans have been upgrading their buildings since roughly 1939. Actually, both of them started roughly in 1937. But the thing is, because they don't start get involved in the war till 1941, it looks far quicker for the Americans. Oh, they just turned on taps and it happened. It takes time to build this infrastructure. It takes time to build the slipways, etc., to launch and build the ships. And it's always going to. You can't snap your fingers and build stuff. Concrete doesn't dry that quickly, especially not the amount of concrete you're talking about drawing, talking about using. So these things take time. But the Royal Navy builds it up. The US built it up. And the thing is, by 1942, they've got the shipyards at maximum churning out. And it's at that point they start being able to consider, well, is it more economical to repair this ship, or is it better to build a new one? But they've managed to stop themselves dropping dramatically because they've been able to repair. If you think of the number of Royal Navy ships which get damaged in World War II versus the number which get sunk, if they hadn't had the facilities to repair them, the fleet would have gone down far quicker. And it's the same with the German Navy. That's the main problem for them. Their ships can't be repaired. They don't have the repair facilities for them. And it's the problem. The Italians have a similar issue, and the Japanese have a massive issue with that. They have very limited dockyard space, and they have to constantly choose between new construction, which they desperately need, or repairing ships, which they desperately need. That's their problem. Limited space, limited construction facilities. Malta! Always nice to consider Malta. As you can see, there is number 5 and number 6 dock, which are combined to be big enough for battleships. And if we go back to our earlier list, well, if we look at Malta, what can take a Neptune? Number 4 dock, number 5 and 6, and number 7 dock. And number 4 dock only if the Cassian's in the outer position. So if we go to Malta and have a look at number 4 dock, ooh, the outer position for the Cassian does move quite a way. Also does to an extent for number 3, but apparently not far enough to take a Neptune. And you're not getting a Neptune into number 1 or number 2 dock. But you've got number 5 and 6 dock it can fit in, and you've got number 7 dock. Ideally, you want things to be able to fit into 5 and 6 dock, because then you've got a nice travelling crane down either side, which can be used to support them and help with moving stuff. But Malta is a critical place, and we'll be getting into Malta in a second as well with other things there. So we're talking about what we call floating dry docks. Amsterdam Freeman. No cash. So they are like good medical facilities returning your injured to field of battle. True. Vision, looks like the RN Dockyard HMS Tamar has been built over in Hong Kong. New convention center or Google Maps, lots of construction. Doesn't surprise me. You know, America was building on a war footing sense from about the same time as the RN started. Yep. The scale a bit off between a dock and the access channel map. I feel like 3.5 minutes ago. Sometimes they are. Sometimes the access channel is a bit different. Let's go. Read concrete drying time. Not correctly, the concrete deep inside whoever's dam still hasn't set. That doesn't surprise me. And yet we never replaced 2/3 of our battlecruiser squadron. If I remember correctly, we lose 3 ships and we build 3 new ones. It's just that they were already under construction. Yes, we might have grown the battlecruiser squadron, but yeah, that's in World War One. In World War Two, we're building King George V's. They're fast battleships. They're under construction. We're not constructing new battlecruisers. And we build Vanguard as well. So, yeah, plus aircraft carriers have to be built, and there's all sorts of things. So, yeah, like I said, you do. And I would argue that aircraft carriers and fast battleships move into the area of the battlecruiser in the 1920s and 30s, and by the time you get to World War II, you actually get into the middle and end of part of World War II. That's the problem for the battlecruiser. It's no longer as flexible. It's not as flexible as the aircraft carrier. And it's honestly, it's not fast enough when compared to the fast battleships. Because the fast battleships are basically saying, right then, we can build something which can do 36, 40 knots. Whew, lovely. But we can build something which can do roughly 30-ish knots, 32 knots, but also with decent armor. Ooh, we prefer that. Or 20 knots plus, at least. Yes, Malta needs more consideration. Malta always gets more consideration. Then we have Halifax. This is what it looks like in 1904. As you can see, it's from a slightly different plan, but on the same website, so it looked quite good to put in. And as you can see, there's a dry dock, quite a big one. Also, a lot of railways. And there is a naval coaling wharf. There is an anchor wharf. There's all sorts of wharf space. And a naval hospital. So again, quite a lot of facilities. All the important things you need. And a lot of railway lines going right past it. Which is, again, useful for a shipyard. Because it means you can get the supplies from where you need them to there. Easily. Because you don't want to try and move armour and coal by the road. You can't move it in enough quantity. And it's very intensively expensive. Tim Richards, what dry docks could the QEs use in World War One? Let's see. Well, HMS Neptune is the largest in being considered in 1909 of the battleships, and she's 166.4 meters overall. Queen Elizabeth class are 196.2 meters overall, so they're 650 foot 9 inches. So they had to do a bit of work to make sure they could accommodate them in most of those dockyards. I think they could use one of the ones in Malta, but I think they get a lot less quite quickly. Let's see. Yeah. It does get a lot less quite quickly. They do some work on them. But there are some, as I said, they're modern British ones. They were upgraded. And there were some which were big enough to begin with. But yeah, you had less than you had for HMS Neptune. Here, what you have in Australia, we have Cockatoo Island, which again is the British building stuff, or rather, adapting an island. It's kind of like Haberline, in that they take over an island and go, "Yes, we will do this." And you get the Fitzroy Dock, the Sutherland Dock. You also have Mort's Dock over in the Waterview Bay area. But this is DRN basically going, well, we can to a certain extent use the entire of that bay and that sort of area, because it's deep enough, as like a basin. And that will give us a fairly constant and protected place. And this island becomes very sensible for us. However, we consider the modern Cockatoo Island is completely overrun with everything and has all these facilities taken on it. That's the result of it. Minishka, I've done an episode about Montague Napier on the automotive side. The Napiers were prolific in 19th century shipbuilding, especially Robert. Care to expand? Tempting. Not in this live, but maybe we'll talk about it at some point. That's when I'm, and I will apologise now if I haven't responded to anyone's email at the moment. That's because it's hand-in season, and I'm currently getting on average 400 to 450 emails a day, which I know is not hectic by most people's standards, but it does kind of swamp my inboxes because I have 4. And I am basically managing them all. So, apologies if I haven't responded to anything. The odds are I will get back to you over the next couple of weeks. Either that, or I will let Drac to flamethrower the email inboxes. Oh. Right. And then we have Simon's Bay. Now, for those of you wondering where Simon's Bay is, I'm just trying to on South Africa. I know where it is. I'm just relation Cape Town, just checking my geography. Okay, so it's on the False Bay. Simon's Bay is sort of nowadays False Bay to an extent. Side of Cape Town. And it's kind of interesting. The modern naval base is still part of this, but this in 1909 was there, and it was very important. And it's still there. It's still the main facility, and pretty much, if you go and look on Google Maps and you want to see something really cool, go look on Google Maps and look at the current Simon's Town Navy base, and you will see that pretty much everything is still laid out as the RN laid it out in 1909. They've added on an outer basin, and they've added on some slips, but pretty much everything is as the Royal Navy left it in terms of its overall shape. Kind of cool. Atomic 52. Did the RN also sketch out foreign naval bases in Dockyards to see what they all had? Yes, they did. That's in a different folder, and I haven't opened that up. I have to go to the archives to get that folder. This folder I have seen in the archives, and I've got some pictures of it from, but they're not as good as the pictures which I found on this website, so I've used the website pictures. John Murray, I know turbits had an issue in Norway with lacking a good size one. Well, that was the reason why the Norwegians actually turned down the Gorgon, HMS Gorgon, because even though she had been being built for the Norwegians, the Royal Navy had modified her so that actually she was too fat to go in any of their existing dry docks, which are in the areas where they wanted to operate. And that was the problem for turbits. They had no dry docks which were big enough for her. Well, Simon's Bay, the nearest dry dock, it was the nearest British dry dock to the Falkland Islands. The nearest British one. And then we have Eskimo Naval Base, which always worried the Americans more than the British thought about it. It worried the Americans a lot because it was a British base in the northern Pacific and on the Pacific coast of North. But it wasn't. It always worried the Americans far more than the British thought about it. And you can sort of see why if you look there, because there is the Canadian government dock, which is a dry dock. And that's about the biggest sort of facility there. If we look at the modern, again, if you go and Google the naval base and you go and have a look at it on Google Maps, which always sounds terrible when I say this to people, who go, "Oh, why are you telling people to go Google Maps?" Well, because you will find it on Google Maps. You will find it again is not much different than it was back then. In fact, it looks pretty much exactly the same and even has the same dry dock, which on the map, Google Maps image, has what looks like a ship, a submarine under work. A submarine's being worked on. One of the Upholder / Victoria class, I presume. And again, it's a legacy. The British built good infrastructure because they needed it. They depended on that infrastructure to keep their fleet going around the world. That's another problem. If you have your ships around the world and they get damaged there, you need to find a way to repair them where they are. Hmm. Vision, I love exploring on Google Maps, including naval bases. Nothing's hidden anymore. I often comment to people is if you can find it on Google Maps, it ain't going to be safe in a war. And this is Auckland, the Admiralty Reserve in 1909, and of course the famous Calliope Dock. Now, again, what I love about this one, Calliope Dock is, I think, is still there. It's as built. It measured 160 meters by 34 meters. It was extended in 1936 and 1943, and again in 1996. And it's now a lot longer, but it's one of those things. You have to be careful because you will end up with HMS Calliope in the in Tyne in Newcastle, which is the RN's reserve unit in some reason, it's obsessed with taking me now. But you can find it on Google Maps, and it does look pretty good. Mitch notes, same problem with Montanas. When they authorize the Montanas, they also authorize the money to widen Panama Canal locks. Yes, and they needed to look at some of the dockyards as well, facilities for them. Because, again, Montanas were going to be big. That's good. Most accurate maps of the UK ever made before modern satellite mapping were made by the Polish Air Force in the 70s and 80s. I'm not quite sure about that. I'm fairly sure the Polish Air Force claims they did, but I think Royal Ordnance Survey might be a bit annoyed about that claim. Because they spent a lot of time making very accurate maps. They just didn't give them to anyone else. Did Britain ever build Enterprise of Warsprite? Hello, Enterprise of Warsprite. I don't think I've seen it before. Did Britain ever be able to build up a naval infrastructure on Bermuda? Well, there you go. Part 4 of 4. Mobile infrastructure, Bermuda floating docks to illustrate. Basically, to talk about floating docks because they change around and move around so much, I decided to use the case study approach. And I used Bermuda as it. As you can see, Bermuda kind of matters. It's in this area and is pretty much critical to the American and West Indies station. You can see it if you look there. It's at a critical point for them. And it's an important space because if we look at this map, well, you'll notice Bermuda does come up, and Bermuda's a floating dock. And they can sort of take a Bellerophon and a Dreadnought, but they can't take anything more recent in this point. And they can't take the newest and the greatest cruisers. They can take the Invincible, but not the Indefatigable. This is another problem when it comes to cruiser design. As I keep trying to explain to people, the reason the Royal Navy would have found a heavy cruiser of up to 20,000 tons really useful in the interwar period and treaty period is because they have a lot of facilities that they can support it. So they could actually use them far more around the world than they could and sustain them far more easily around the world than they could the bigger ships, because you either have to upgrade it to take the 40,000 ton up to 40,000 ton stuff, or you have to not. Can they take a battleship? This is the first question I normally get asked by students when I start talking about floating dry docks. And I go, voila! If it's big enough, it can do it. This is a floating dry dock. I'm not sure precisely which one, because they move around a bit, up there in Invergordon, in 1918. And there is HMS Erin, and I hope she's enough battleship for you. But this is Bermuda. And if we go to Her Majesty's Dockyard Bermuda and we have a look at all the facilities, you'll notice they have a victualling yard, they have dockyard, they have the North Basin and the South Basin, and they have a floating dock. They don't have a dry dock facility, they have a floating dock. That's good. The channel map did a comparison between period ordnance survey, or rather the publicly declared period ordnance survey maps, the Polish Air Force, and modern satellite maps. And the Polish Air Force ones are apparently better. Nice to know. Could Bermuda take something like a Congo-class battleship battlecruiser? Well, probably not. And we'll have a discussion as to why. But as you can see, that one couldn't take... If we go back to this again, you see she can't... The one they have there in 1909 can take... Well... If in lightened form, it can take Bellerophon and Dreadnought. And it can take an Invincible, but so it probably wouldn't be able to take a Congo. But let's see. The Royal Navy starts off with a dry dock in Bermuda, a floating dock, the Bermuda floating dock, rather early. In fact, it's kind of a critical facility for the Royal Navy. And yeah. And again, I'm going to have some details down below about the Bermuda floating dry docks in this, so you can go and find a web link. I've used the Dawlish Chronicles site because it's a very cool site and it managed to find a lot of cool pictures, which I've used for this one. So I wanted to be able to see the pictures, basically. So, this is Admiralty Floating Dock number 1, as it would eventually be called for Bermuda. Now, I've listed Admiralty Floating Dock number 1 like that, because it's the first floating dock the Royal Navy builds. But this is not actually the one which becomes AFD1. This is the predecessor, which is replaced in 1906 by a ship which in 1925 is actually officially called Admiralty Floating Dock number 1 rather than the Bermuda Floating Dock. The Royal Navy decide they need a floating dock in the 1860s, and this is actually completed in 1869, I think, 1868. This picture is done in 1868. So that is what we're talking about. And as you can see, it looks kind of interesting. The floating dry dock is literally that. It's a huge space which is designed to take ships going into them and then floating up with them in. It was designed originally to take ships of up to 10,000 tons. That's sort of Britain's new ironclads that they're building. But it had to also be designed to be careened and cleaned by scraping. So the design is 380 feet long, 120 with 120 feet separation between its vertical sides, and could accommodate vessels longer than its own length, and its own displacement was only 8,400 tons. Because of the way it picks it up, and the ship picks it up, it can actually deal with ships overhanging at either end, as long as they are balanced properly. And floating dry docks, I cannot emphasize enough, are a balancing game. They have to be balanced properly, or you are in trouble. Very, very big trouble. Okay? So, how was she got out there? Well, she was towed. She was towed out by HMS Warrior and HMS Black Prince, and HMS Terrible was astern to act as guide. So you actually had these two great big ironclad frigates taking her out, towing her across to Bermuda. It was a complicated procedure, but the Royal Navy did it themselves. They built her themselves. They towed her out themselves. Everything themselves. They could do it, and they did. They were very happy to do it because they needed it out there. That's what they needed for that station. And in the 1860s, what's of course going on? Well, there's been the various incidents during the American Civil War, and actually building a floating dry dock for Bermuda actually makes a lot of sense. Building a permanent dry dock, that becomes a major threat. A floating dry dock, well, there's always the option the British could move it away if they decide it's causing an issue. Dan Freeman, thank you for jumping in. Atomic Ferry 62. There's always the USAFD auxiliary floating dock 2 to point as a dry dock facility, floating dry dock that can take a battleship. Yes, there is, but don't take this the wrong way. I'm a British historian teaching British students. I'm going to use the British dry dock. If I was teaching American students, I would probably be using the American dry dock. If I was teaching Japanese students, there is a very nice picture of a Japanese dry dock with, I think, a Congo in it, from memory. Audio. Audio? Seems to be working. You can't hear me well. I'm sorry about that. I'll move this closer. The bar is still moving across. Hello, my name is 6040. Yay, I'm home and I have a semi-usable internet. Woo! Okay. Ordering careened. Well, you've asked Melanie 640, and luckily I am going to show you. And there you go. That's a picture of it actually being careened, and literally it was designed to be dragged ashore to into the shallows and then rocked from side to side so they could scrape off any dirt and any fouling on its side so its hull didn't get eaten away in the tropical climate. Isn't that cute? And this is a picture of the dry dock in 1900 before it's replaced in 1906. So this is a picture of the 1860s dry dock. Still in service. Demogiving. I read some of the soil and limestone of Bermuda made for terrible terrain for a dry dock. Too porous. So a floating dry dock was suggested and built for a station. Glenn, you are perfectly right. That was the justification used for doing this. But there were a few engineers at the time who pointed out, but we have concrete and we can deal with that. No, it's too porous. But it's too porous. Oh, okay. It's one of those scenarios. You can get round it with engineering means if you choose to. But it was also considered quite a good thing for the Royal Navy to do because the Americans wouldn't be too upset with it. And the Royal Navy showing they can take this dock around the world means that they can take their facilities wherever they need to go. It's basically the Royal Navy going, yeah, you have on your lovely list of things how many dry docks we have around the world as part of your intelligence. That's great. But we have ships which are not really now our let's be honest, primary assets. We have other ships being built. They're still pretty good, but we have other better ships being built, especially as time goes on. But we have ships which can tow this thing around the world, which can give us an extra dock facility that can do this work anywhere we need it. If you want to see the full-size quality picture of it, go to the link down below. I've saved it. That you'll find to the Dawlish Chronicles site, and they have it there. It was rolled over by flooding to expose its bottom. So it could either be pulled into shore or could be selectively flooded in certain sections and rolled over using the flooding technique. So we flood this part and then roll it to one side, flood the other side, roll it to the other side. And as such comes this, which shows it being its full what it does. So it could be rolled from side to side to be careened and thick and maintain itself. So it could self-maintaining. It could dock down to take in a large ship and pick up to repair it and maintain and try and fix it. And it could even get it, or it could get it past way out of the water, so be used as sort of graving dock, semi sort of basin, or be a full way out of the water, as in a full dry dock. Or it could have a smaller ship put in it, and they could actually put the ship, they could float the ship in if they wanted, and use it as the launching facility or a repair facility for a ship which was on a barge. It's a very useful piece of kit. And this is what it was designed to do. But it makes it also a bit of a scary piece of kit if you think about it. Because if you're a foreign power and you're looking at the Royal Navy, well, this is a self-maintaining forward infrastructure which can go wherever the Royal Navy needs it to go to maintain their ships. And again, when we're talking about things like potential operations in a major war on Earth, again, you need it. But it's one of the interesting things, again, in sci-fi, we don't see these sorts of things that often. They sometimes talk about them, and especially in books they talk about them, but they don't tend to actually display them in things like Star Trek or Star Wars. And you need them. If you think about it, having a facility like this, a mobile space dock facility, would have been essential for things like the Rebels in Star Wars. Because where else are they going to repair their ships? They need that sort of facility to be mobile to be able to protect it. And if you're talking about supporting operations in the Dominion War, etc., I would argue that some of the issues that Starfleet has is because they don't have enough of these sort of mobile repair facilities. And if we go back in time, back to Japan, well, floating docks like this, they don't have enough of. It would have been a very, how do I put this? Infrastructure-minded technological approach technique to take to go, we need to maximize the shipyard and ship construction capacity of our landlocked yards, yards, because they are best for building ships. Okay, then we need to build as many floating dry docks as possible, or acquire as many floating dry docks as possible, maybe even old British ones and old French ones and old German ones, in order to do the support of our fleet. As we know, Japan doesn't do long-term or joined-up thinking in the run-up to World War II, unfortunately. That's good. Permanent dry dock also has issues with moving the equipment and resources to Bermuda. Would be a much bigger job than towing a floating dry dock over to the Atlantic. I can agree with that, but there are several shapes of floating dry docks, and yet there are other options you can sort of do. There are issues, but they could have surmounted them. Derp Squad. Also, given it's a relatively small island, shoreline space has a relative premium over large islands. You are talking... Okay, Derp Squad. Let me just remind you two things. We have Cockatoo Island, which is smaller than Bermuda. And then we have, if we go back to it, we have Holbow Line, where the Royal Navy literally doubled the size of an island to build a dry dock. Okay? They literally doubled the size of an island to build a dry dock. Most of this island did not exist before the Royal Navy decided to build it. I am sorry. I understand the points you're making, and they are all sensible engineering points, and they were well argued. But if the Royal Navy had decided they wanted to build a permanent dry dock in Bermuda, especially in 1860s, they'd have built one. They didn't. They wanted a floating dry dock, so they built a floating dry dock. Down in 640, asymmetric balance things. So they just exposed the hull to the air so men could walk up and clean, right? Yep. Yeah. Star Wars does not touch on this by making Supremacy the First Order's flagship, serve as a space dock and shipyard facility. Yeah. But there again, where does the Supremacy dry dock? And if you consider all the careful balancing that has to go into this to get it to work, okay, this is where I'm going to talk about the Kuznetsov. You have to be very, very careful. You have to maintain these. They are very specialist pieces of equipment. They will not last forever because they have to have very thick hulls, but they have to do a lot of balancing, and they get salt water on both sides of the hull. Not many things which are built to have salt water go inside them as well as outside them last for long in terms of corrosion. You have to build them with very thick steel. You also have to be very careful when balancing them. If you don't put the ship in the right spot, you can cause the whole thing to move. If it moves, then things start collapsing and toppling around you because, unlike a graving dock, it's not cemented in the earth. If the ship moves on it, the dock will move around it. And they are very heavy things, so once they start moving, they really do move. Mm-hmm. I was asking, I think for space you don't need a dock per se, you just need a stable orbit and a repair ship next to you. You see, I would say if you're going to be working outside on a ship, on a ship in space, you'll probably want some kind of shielding from radiation as well, which is why I would suggest you'd want that sort of facility, because you would want some protection from the radiation of the delicate systems inside. I knew I liked Battlestar Galactica better for a reason. She has two in her fleet. Scooters Gap. Hello. Considering the value, were an enemy's mobile dry docks ever made a priority target for military planners? Yes. Both the Germans, the Germans and Italians really wanted to hunt down British British floating docks. Some of the criteria planning for Hawaii for Pearl Harbor did talk about attacking the dry docks, and the British were always trying to make runs at dry docks. The British basically did entire operations to disable dry dock facilities. The British are obsessed with it. It's just almost cruel. It's a case of you have a lovely dry dock in France, built on the graving dock in France, which is wonderful. Wonderful. We will destroy it with a whole destroyer loaded with explosives to make sure you cannot use it. You have dock facility in Denmark, in the Netherlands, in Belgium. Oh yes, well we'll bomb the life out of that. Yeah, it's fun. No, I did not say that. Anyway, a floating dry dock means we can build up a fleet base near your home fast, and you can do anything if you want to annoy us. In polite British Empire speech. Was that a Who Dry Docks the Dry Dock? That's good. The two you mentioned are indeed small islands, but I was more talking about Bermuda as a whole, so the comparison would have to be, it would be Australia and the island of Ireland. Yes and no. Again, the Royal Navy, if they wanted to on Bermuda, they could do it. Until they wanted. I was asking, wasn't Raid at St. Nazaire made to destroy a large dry dock? Yep. That was pretty much that's the British for you. The one thing the Royal Navy understands how important dry docks are. One thing everyone else understands: the Royal Navy will target your dry docks. It's kind of like, here is a list of your dry docks. Here is a list of the Royal Navy's targets in your country. They will take out all your docks. So you approve of the space dock of Star Trek, the one that seems to search for Spock, then closes starships completely? Yeah, makes sense. Seneca, did Japan ever consider bombing the Panama Canal? Did Britain? Both did. Japan was going to use submarines for it, and the British were basically had plans that if they needed to, they would have bombarded it. Was the idea. The cruisers stationed in the North America West Indies station would go and do something, was the idea. But the British really didn't think about it too much, because it was kind of like, how do I put it? By the time it's sort of being looked at in the 20s and 30s, planning for war against America is not really Britain's idea. Britain's looking at war with Japan, Italy, and Germany as the main primaries, and America is a good theoretical exercise to look at because they have the world's largest navy other than Britain, and it's the same for Britain with America with War Plan Red and Britain. It's a kind of case of, right then, what's our worst case scenario? Fighting a navy the same size as us? Well, that's the British if you're American. It's the Americans if you're British. So you think it through because it's your worst case scenario. And here is a nice outline of a floating dry dock, which I thought you might like. Look at. This is a self-docking floating dock. Ordinary lifting power up to 15,500 tons, maximum lifting power 17,500 tons, and this was completed in 1902. And this was a basis of the one which was built in 1906 to replace the one in Bermuda, and which became Admiralty Floating Dock number 1. And here are the list of the floating docks. Now, I've got some from post-World War II, some from World War II, some numbered docks which are interesting as to when exactly they come into service. Some of the others are kind of interesting, and I've added some details here. You'll find it's a very similar list on Wikipedia because we both used from the same sources to put them together. And there are some which I'm trying to put together in still putting details of, and that's why this is, of course, video number 4, because I'm still compiling details on this. The ones which are left blank without details are ones which I've found multiple details for, and I'm trying to figure out which one they might be, because I have a feeling they might be getting them mixed up. For example, I've got Admiralty Floating Dock number 17 there, which, as you can see, was sent to Reykjavik. It was built during World War II, but moved to Sydney in 1944 and arrived there in May 1945 to support the operations out there. It was built. It's 2,700 tons, built in Devonport, and it's capable of basically supporting destroyers and some of the smaller cruisers. It makes sense, but this is the thing. The Royal Navy's going, right in, we're operating out of Iceland. Hey, Iceland is important for us for operations. Yep. We've taken them over because of protecting them from German invasion. Despite the fact the Germans would actually get to Reykjavik, we're not quite sure, but that's what we're claiming. And we're using it to support our North Atlantic operations in the convoy war. Okay, right then, we need to put... the floating dock facilities there aren't that good. We need to go and put something there. And interesting enough, if you look at them, some of these floating dry docks are still fabricated. There is one which is fabricated in Calcutta, assembled in Bombay, 1944, and actually at the moment was in Halfandor, Iceland until until 1995. Was scrapped in between 2021 and 2022. Supposed to be scrapped right now. And the other one, Admiralty Floating Dock number 60, built in Portsmouth in 1965, 6,000 ton capacity for nuclear submarines, and that was actually moved to Halfandor, Iceland in 1987. It's still in operation to this day. There's a fair number of them still around the world. Admiralty floating docks are a big thing. They're quite useful. Dan, why do you think the RM bombarded Genoa periodically? Dry docks. Yes, and it's quite easy to target the dry docks. You know where they are. Dry docks in Gibraltar versus Bermuda. Gibraltar is smaller, isn't it? Yes, it is. Atomic Theory 52. Did the British plan to disable Kiel Canal? They kept dropping mines in it, I think, in World War One and World War Two. In World War One, they wanted to put mines in it. In World War Two, they wanted to put mines in it. Brent Polos, I'd love to see a special on attacking shipyard facilities. I might. Again, if you want these sort of things as ideas, please go put them into the patron suggestions. And even if they don't get win the first time, if you put them in again, they might win. The interesting thing about the dry dock, which is built in 1906 for Bermuda, it has to be upgraded to be able to take vessels of HMS York size and above. So it's basically a cruiser dry dock. But that makes sense for Bermuda Station. That's what they mostly have out there. And frankly, if they needed a battleship facility out there, they would take one. They'd float it out there. Danrin, was a floating dock a commissioned ship or an RFA or just a thing? Interesting enough, they'd usually have both a lieutenant commander of engineers and they would have a shipwright commander aboard them, a shipwright from the Royal Navy constructors, naval constructors. So they'd have a sort of mixed crew of about 30, and that's why they're called Admiralty floating docks. They are sort of not a commissioned ship, but are a commissioned ship, and the Admiralty takes very good care of them. But usually you'd have a crew of about 30 to 60 on a floating dock. But then they would bring in people who would be the actual welders, and the personnel would come from a ship repair for ship, which we would know as sort of those tenders and repair vessels which would come along. So you'd have a floating dock with its crew, which would operate the cranes and things aboard the dock and manage the dock. And then you'd have the repairmen. Come on, we will do the welding and all those things. And as you can see, this dock has cranes. It has all the facilities it needs. The cranes are actually, if you look, are able to move along the ship. Able to move along the dock, and go to where they need to in order to reach what they need to. It's a complicated process, but it's important. It keeps your ships going. It keeps your fleet going. And for Britain, it's a huge advantage having these things. But again, they have a lot of them. Some would be used for smaller lifts. As you can see, floating dock number 11 had a lifting capacity of 60,000 tons. So that's that can take battleships and larger ships, etc. But if it's for 240 tons, then it's probably for a smaller ship. It's for things like torpedo boats and occasionally vessels which are larger than that, but smaller trawlers, etc. As you can see, there's floating dock number 4, which is a Medway, which it could do 32,000 tons. Again, that's battleship level. The Admiralty floating dock in Singapore, also known as Singapore Dock, had the capacity to lift 55,000 tons and was 855 feet long. There is the Admiralty Floating Dock Number 6, Sheerness, built by Swan Hunter and Wigham Richardson. 280 foot, 2,000 tons, intended for Harwich to lift 2 destroyers at a time. Moved to Sheerness in 1920. And at some points, there was both Admiralty Floating Dock Number 1 and Number 5 at Bermuda. But they moved Number 5 elsewhere. Admiralty Floating Dock Number 14 was at Scalper Flow during World War II. And as I said, it had a 240-ton lift, so it would deal with smaller vessels. The same with 15 and 16. But then 17 has a 2,750-ton lift. And 18 and 19, I'm fairly certain, are built to the same design as 17. And I wouldn't be surprised if 20 is the same design as well. That replaced AFD number 7, which had been on about a similar design. So had been a similar lifting capacity. And I think, honestly, my main view is that the ones which are 17 to 22 are all built to a roughly similar pattern design. Able to lift destroyers comfortably. They're focusing on the destroyers because, again, destroyers grow quickly, and existing dry dock facilities for destroyers need to be ramped around building them. So 2 of these floating docks are still in operation. Yes, there are at least 2 still in operation. There are a few others, I think, around the world which I'm not quite sure about their operation. So, did an old floating dock ever get encased in concrete and then used as a graving dock? I don't think so. Thank you, Bejon. I'll look forward. I'll look at it on Twitter. But it is now 9:30 and I'm getting hungry, so I am going to finish this up when we get to the last slides and answer any questions and then go order food. Because currently, the most calories I've had all day come from Iron Brew, and that's not sensible. And I know it's not sensible. Scooter Gap. Floating dry docks of one navy able to easily serve the ships of another navies. Yes. As long as the ships they can the ship they're lifting is within the lifting capacity of them, and they are given the pressure points on the ship, and it's basically how its center of mass and those sort of things, they can lift them up. And then if they have the repair people come in, they can. It's like any dock. So any dock can service any ship. You just need to know the details of the ship before you put it in and be able to accommodate it. That's true. Why don't we have any now? Because we don't have enough ships in the Royal Navy to justify having them. So floating dock is the same sort of grey area as the stone frigates. It is also less surprising the British came up with the Mulberry Harbours after seeing the list of floating docks. Yeah, it's kind of like, Mulberry Harbours are these great ideas. Are you building floating dry docks of concrete? Yes, we have been in Canada for a while. Oh. Okay. Right then. All right. Woo. Anyway, but York is the final one. What have we got coming up? Next week we have London-class counties, and the counties are pretty much all recorded now, along patrols to them. Then we have the Brommer class, and then the Duke of Edinburgh class, and then the 1904 Forward class. Woohoo! And also, as said, these are going to be turned into long patrols, which will come out on the 4 Mondays in February. So they'll expect them. Well, not on the they'll expect them on the 31st of January, the 7th of February, the 14th of February, and the 21st of February. Oh, I have another Russian bot. Hello, Russian bot. How are you? Bye-bye, Russian bot. Mm-hmm. Oswalski, very interesting topic today. I'm glad. Hello, Stanford Sondon. Don't worry. Hope you did well with bosses. New IKB-4 facility. Are there any self-propelled floating dry docks? There are a couple which had some work done on them, but as a rule, they weren't. As a rule, they needed the space for other things rather than engines. Floating box built when are still in service? There's one from World War II, which was assembled in Bombay, fabricated in Calcutta and assembled in Bombay in 1944, it's just been scrapped in Iceland. And there's another one which was assembled in 1965, which is still in operation in Iceland. Plus, there's a few Russian ones which are even older, which are still in service. John Barrow, what is your thoughts on docks from the first Star Trek movie? Kind of like a ladder structure. That would suggest to me that they're going to have to do a lot of their work in pods. I wasn't able to ask this last Sunday. Reading the Against All Odds wiki, Hood is preserved as a museum ship at Scalp Float. Is Scalp Float a suitable place for a museum ship? Oh God! Oh God! Yes, you could, but oh God, those storms. Ideally, you'd want a slightly more sheltered spot, but you could do it. But oh, why would you do that to yourself? Why? Right. Thank you very much, everyone. I'm going to answer the questions, but then I'm going to go get some food. I'm hungry. Dungiani, weren't the mulberries like what the Romans built at Caesarea? I think there is some similarity, but it's different. Ooh, roast beef and potatoes for lunch. Oh, cool. Lucky you. Right. As said, the reason I am puddling off is because I'm hungry. Thank you very much for all your help today and all your enjoyment of it, I hope. And I hope you've had fun. Right. Also, really cutting down on your traffic by putting a museum up there. Yeah, it'd be fun. In London, where Belfast is now, I don't think they put Hood in London. It's not enough space. You'd probably be looking at Liverpool, let's be honest. Probably Liverpool, Mersey, that sort of area, you could put one. Well, see, the fact that the Galaxy is a cruiser is funny. Right, Glamour going? Ooh. I can see your point, Glenn McCliggey, on that one. I don't think the British would want to do that. You can do anything with enough money. The Americans might concentrate their fleet, and if the British are trying to defend the Panama from the whole American fleet, they might not be able to defend the UK. I concluded that to fix Taiho, am I right, she'd have to lose armor to add her concrete? You'd have to rebuild the entire fuel control system. Right. thank you very much, everyone. Take care, and I hope you've enjoyed today's videos. As you can see, we've got the Battle of Dew coming up on the 3rd of February, and we have Lord Charles Beresford on the 10th of February. And we currently have, and I will say this now, we currently have patron suggestions live. So please, if you're a patron and you want to make suggestions about topics for February, please, it's live. The vote will be open as on Sunday. So basically, suggestions have to be in by tomorrow, by Saturday. I mean, today's Friday, tomorrow, and today's Thursday. Tomorrow. This is what I do when I'm hungry. I'm going to go get some food. Thank you very much, everyone. Take care and have a nice evening.